Right.
Manager.
You guys ready?
And we end up in a couple of those places.
Good evening. It is 6:30 on February the 10th, and we're here for the monthly meeting of the Mayor and City Council. If you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated.
It's easy to break things up there. Little easy, get things going.
Thank you all for coming out on a rather dreary February night. Appreciate your being here. Before we get started, I have a few announcements I'd like to share with you all. First of all, I'd like to welcome Janelle Cornwell, our new city planner. Thank you very much, Janelle. Looking forward to having you join us. Thank you very much. This is this is the beginning of your second week, right?
Yes.
That's great.
Coming back.
And speaking of people who keep coming back, for almost 3 years, Paul's been out of this building, but tonight, almost 3 years later, Paul Eckridge, our former city manager, decided to come back for a visit. So good to see you, Paul. It took his daughter having to earn some credits for high school to get him to come back here, but College, excuse me. Thank you, Jennifer, I'm sorry. You just look like you're still in high school. Anyway, so a couple other announcements. I think most of you are aware that City Hall will be closed next Monday, as well as the Board of Public Works, in observance of President's Day. Unfortunately, also the Savannah Road Bridge will be closed for a few more days, just until Thursday.
Oh, okay.
Yes, don't look at it.
I thought you
It's
meant
going to be
more
open
than-
for Valentine's Day, I'm assured by DELDOT. And after that will be the end. They tell me that will be the end of complete closure of Savannah Road Bridge. However, there will be days of lane closure and perhaps nights of lane closure, but the bridge will not be completely closed again. We started budget hearings this past week, and they will continue on for the next several weeks. Just if you're interested in watching how budget gets done, you could join us this Wednesday, the 12th, on Friday, the 21st, Monday, March 2nd, Friday, March 6th, or final approval back here on March 16th. So those are all dates that are available. These meetings generally happen at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And
somewhere earlier.
The last one is
right, on the 13th, it'll be at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So that's moving along. Also, tonight we have another new process going on here. We are testing audio streaming, and that is being done through the city's website. It's a test today. We didn't announce it, and assuming that it's successful, you'll be able to do that starting next month, we think, correct?
Yes, and with that, the audio will also be available on our website following the meeting. So if you have plans and you just can't bear the thought of not listening to a council meeting, you can listen to it the next day.
Or God forbid, we should go back and listen to ourselves.
Oh, God. Oh, well. And then in March, we will be moving our date from our monthly meeting from the second Monday to the third Monday. So it'll be on March the 16th, which will be a date change for us. And that's because of a conference that some of us will be attending. So anyway, we'll be back on a regular second Monday after that, and that will continue on through the rest of the year. Except for holidays.
May meeting.
The May meeting will be
May meeting because of the possible election.
Right.
Okay. So, other than that, at the end of the week, we're going to have Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody, a little in advance. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda that anyone has at this time? Okay. Not moving on to item E1 as a presentation of proclamation proclaiming April 19th through the 25th, 2020 as National Volunteer Week in the City of Lewes. I don't think I need to remind everybody how dependent this town is on volunteers. We have a fantastic volunteer basis in this community, and this community would not be what it is without our volunteers. And for those of you who volunteer that are in this room, we thank you very much for what you do, and we thank everyone, whether it's whatever organization you belong to. We have many, many organizations, and all of them count on the volunteers' efforts to keep them going. So we thank you for what you do. It really does make a difference in this town. Item E2 is a presentation and consideration of the appointment of 3 members of the Board of Elections for a 1-year term. I would ask the council approve Joan Reeder, Nina Kanata, and Dee Lott, who have previously served in these positions, and they have agreed to serve again.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Item E3 is presentation of possible action on the appointment of 1 member to the Public Art Committee. As you'll know, this is a new committee that has had a couple of vacancies on it, and they have suggested, and I have talked with Heidi Lowe, who's a long-term resident of Lewes. Actually, I think she probably was born in this community, and she is a jeweler and lives in town at this time. She has a jewelry store and does a lot of jewelry fabrication in Rehoboth, and I would ask the committee, or the council, approve her appointment to this committee.
Moved.
A motion.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And then item E4 is presentation and possible action on the appointment of 1 member to the Lewes Bicycle Advisory Committee. I would ask council to consider John McGovern. Many of you know John McGovern. He was the maintenance person for the Lewes Historical Society for many years, retired last year, is an active walker and biker in the community, and lives in town, and has come forward and asked to be appointed to this, and I think he'll be a good addition. I know he's been attending meetings for the past several months, so I would ask council's approval of that.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Then moving on to item F, which is a consent agenda that consists of the council meeting minutes, public works meeting minutes, the financial activity report, the police activity report, and the fire department activity report. Does anyone want to have any of those pulled out to talk about separately? Okay. Could we have a motion to approve the consent agenda then as presented?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. All right, Anne Marie, it's your turn. City manager's report.
All right, the mayor mentioned the bridge closure, but one of the other projects that's getting ready to start up, I think either this week or next week, is the installation of the new water services, water main, and lining of the sewer main on Pilot Town Road. And that will involve lane closures throughout the construction process, but no road closures are anticipated.
Any time frame on that?
That's a long project.
Well, actually, it's a project that will last through as long, probably well into the spring, Dennis,
And then pick back up
in the fall.
in the fall.
Because it's running all the way from basically the net house out to the end of the road.
Right. So it's a big project.
It will just be lane closures, however, as we've already
Right.
said.
We actually did a final inspection on the Savannah Road bicycle improvements that were done between the drawbridge and American Legion Road. There is still a punch list of items that needs to be completed. The Planning Commission remains busy, but they did now discuss their wetlands buffer ordinance at their last meeting, and they have a number of subcommittees that they've set up, one to work on the buffer ordinance, one to address the issue of fill in the floodplain, and one to deal with sea level rise. Other meetings and activities, both the department managers and mayor and council held annual retreats on January 9th. I guess I'm wishing for warmer weather. And in these retreats, we worked on prioritizing things for the coming year, which is very instrumental in helping us to put the budget together. And putting the budget together was kind of the major task of the month of January. Allison Kirk, Mayor Becker, and I met with DELDOT staff and residents who were part of the Lewes Junction Railroad and Bridge Association to discuss options for saving the bridge. So they're looking for a location to store the bridge for a period of time while they work on fundraising and securing a permanent location. Bonnie Osler and I met with Diana Beebe to talk about how we can raise awareness of Lyme disease. And I've reached out to DENREC and started that discussion with them. The newly formed African American Heritage Commission met for the first time on January 31st. Future meetings will be on the third Thursday of the month, so their next meeting is February 20th. Yeah, I had a mental block there. Those are kind of the high points. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
It was reported that Kennedy had said they could store the bridge on his property.
Yes.
Is that in the city?
That is in the city, and we need to have some follow-up discussions because that subject property is zoned open space, so that may require council approval. So
That was
we need
what I was getting to.
we'll have to revisit that,
If it's in the
yes.
city, that the storing a bridge on property in the city meet regulations.
In the
I wonder.
location that they're talking about, it is zoned open space. Mayor and council can approve a temporary use. But, so that, if that is the location they go with, that's likely to come to you.
Okay, thank you.
I think we need to hear from the building official, too.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Just as a follow-up to Anne Marie's comments, and thank you very much. Anne Marie and I have been participating on a monthly basis with Chesapeake Utilities. As many of you know, we are trying to grow natural gas system in this community. And we were informed during our conference call with them this morning, or this afternoon, that they are going to be sending out a survey over the next 60 days to about 300 households in the city about future expansion. Not everybody in the community will be included in that, but I encourage you, if you're at all interested, to please do take time to respond to the survey. They are looking for, they have to have a corpus of people in order to expand in any given quadrant or section of the city. And so if you are thinking about it, please do take time to respond to it. It's very important.
Which sections of the city will
going to
receive
be
the questionnaire?
The questionnaire at this point will go pretty much from 3rd Street to 4th Street, from Market over to Burton. In that area will be the quadrant that they'll be surveying next. And they expect that will be out within the next 60 days. We had several other sections of the city that have been looked at and have not met the requirements in the past, and that includes DeVries Circle, which has been long asking, some of the residents there have been long asking for it, and they are reevaluating that model again for DeVries Circle. So hopefully in the next couple of months we'll have more information there.
An installation is underway in Reserves of Pilottown,
Right.
and that should be completed this week.
Are moving along that line. Are there any other questions or comments for Anne Marie's report? Hearing none, moving on then to item H1 is presentation and possible action on the Parks and Rec Commission recommendation regarding the tennis court refurbishment. Allison Kirk is here from Parks and Rec Commission, and we also have had a public hearing on this. There's been a lot of discussion about it. Charlie O'Donnell is here from the engineering firm. I think we have had a lot of information about this, and council has the recommendation from the Parks and Rec Commission, which had recommended moving forward, leaving the current configuration as it is. We will not be taking additional public comment this evening. Are there comments from the table or discussion from the table, or do you have questions that you would like to pose to Allison or Charlie?
I guess I do want to say hats off to the Park and Rec Committee. They gave this full vetting, they had public hearings, all kinds of input and everything, and you guys did a good job, and I just want to acknowledge all the work that you put into this.
You're here.
Any other comments?
Which is, as I understand this, the recommendation that's come up from Parks and Rec, tennis and pickleball will coexist,
Exactly.
basically. So both recreational options will remain in the city of Lewes.
It should be noted, Mayor, that this is not a perfect solution for either tennis players or pickleball players. Both of them would like more. This is half a loaf for each. And I do hope that we can explore the possibility of creating more courts in the city.
I think that's been suggested by various members of the community and perhaps by the press as well. I do think there are other ways. I agree with you that it is a compromise situation, and it's not perfect, but it is a situation that seems to meet, to some extent, both the needs of both at this time, while we explore other options. Okay. There's no further discussion. I'd entertain a motion.
I move to accept the recommendation of the Parks and Rec Commission.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I would like to make one of the things that I saw in all the meetings was that while they coexist, that there are times that maybe there's a whole lot of pickleball players and there aren't many tennis players, or I don't know if it's worth considering you guys to come up with some kind of a schedule, Parks and Rec, I don't know. I know you talked about it, and maybe it's something you want to further consider, some kind of a schedule.
Yeah, I agree with Dennis. I think there was a lot of discussion at the workshop about how the pickleball players were organized through a website, and it was advertised statewide to come to this particular location, and I think there's some problem with basically having pickleball ousting tennis, and there's got to be a way to balance the two. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be a way to do it. So, something to work on.
I know that pickleball, when the tennis courts were first installed, pickleball didn't exist as a sport. Or if it did, it was in its infancy, and it certainly is a sport that's taken off. And it's a great recreational sport. I don't play it, but I've certainly watched enough of it, and I know a lot of people are getting a lot of exercise out of it. And this is by no means, the action taken here today is by no means intending to put a damper on that. It's just a matter of being respectful of both the tennis players and the pickleball players. There are other options that could be looked at, creating other courts elsewhere in the city. So I know that the group that's been very interested in pickleball is very resourceful, and I would encourage you to work with Parks and Rec and the city to identify where else we might be what else might be considered for perhaps an independent pickleball court situation. So, thank you very much. Okay. And thanks, Allison, for all your work. I know that Parks and Rec Committee did a lot of discussion about that. Thank you. So moving then on to item H2 is presentation of possible action on a request by Quest to have a concession at Roosevelt Inlet during the summer of 2020. This is another topic that was discussed at last month's meeting, and we also discussed it last year. And Matt Carter brought it to us last year. We declined to proceed with it last year. He brought it back to us this year for reconsideration. Matt, you made a very lengthy presentation last month. If you have some additional information you want to share, fine, but otherwise I think we've already talked about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I don't want to go over the whole proposal, obviously. We did that. There was just a couple unanswered questions that we had. One was, you want to bring this up?
Sure.
It was the,
That's fine.
DENREC.
Mm-hmm.
So I just printed out one copy of that,
Okay.
and this is just a highlight of briefly what I'm going over today.
Okay.
And
This is the application.
that was the application. So DENREC basically said, city has full jurisdiction of everything below the dune line, but to get a temporary structure, you have to fill out an application, and as long as the city says it's okay, they would come in and help assist on doing, telling where it can and cannot go, just like they do with every other town here, for anything like Rehoboth and Dewey and Bethany, Fenwick. And they would just help with the placement, and then we've already met all their guidelines, or we met all the requirements on how fast it must be removed, the size, and basically hurricane proofing it. So they said the next part would be up to you if it went that far. The other one was that the city does not have a commercial contract proposal or anything in writing for anybody to do this. I've talked with Becky Lovin, who I worked with from Delaware Parks and Recreation, and basically, that's the 75-page, I did not print it out for you, I emailed it, contract. And she's like, it is a public document. She would be happy to help and talk and assist with anybody in the city of Lewes. And you can consolidate it much, probably down to 10 pages, but the things that were in there was being a non-motorized water sport proposal, what is the commercial concession, types of insurance needed, which we've fulfilled for the state of Delaware. The scope of work was the proposal last month you saw. Payment plans for the city, whether it's through a donation, through a Parks and Rec, or just directly to the city. However, that is for you to decide. Required reporting, how we report to the state parks monthly on the usage reports, and having it as audits or the open book policy they can come in and look at any time. And then meeting the emergency protocols. So whether it's on the beach, it's, police, 911, Coast Guard, depending what the emergency could be, inclement weather, things like that. And these are all things that we've established with the states. With the state Parks and Rec, it would show a lot of a guideline if the city was to design one for any commercial concession. I can help with. We've talked about helping with Parks and Rec to design one of these. And then just through the last month of community support, I went and walked through town, stopped by many houses, and basically commercial. I have it was over 20 local businesses downtown. Actually, a few more emailed me today saying they were in support of it. I have 90 plus from City of Lewes on Bayside and this side of the canal. And then there was another 20 on just Lewes zip code area. And that's where I walked to, talked to everybody, and got a signature from. But on social media, we've, in the last 4 days, we got 200 supports, long, lengthy, in support of locals and tourists, really pushing in favor of this. And basically, last push for it, I'm still striving for a 5-month trial run for this year, and helping design a contract with no commitments to the following year. If did not work, and some type of guaranteed revenue for the city, whether to your discretion. I would like to work with Parks and Rec because I was on the board, and I think it was just a very cohesive group that I could work with, just how they provide the volleyball courts and things on the beach. I think there should be something down there, not volleyball courts, but something for the public, since it is a public parking lot. So I just wanted to have those. Those were the questions I felt we were left open from last time. And, I have proposals, everything from last time, if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Other questions or comments from the table?
One small question, Matt.
Yes, sir.
DENREC says city has jurisdiction below the dune line, so you'll be putting the shack below the dune line.
Yes.
Where is that? Is that between
It's-
the dune and the bay?
Between the dune and bay.
And is that
basically-
not subject to tides, to flooding?
Well, it depends how low. They give you a, just like when they're doing the fence,
Right.
right? They have a certain scale from high tide, low tide to where, and then, I don't know their equation for it to where the dune goes up that they can have. It is a height measurement. And then it's also dependent on their discretion on dune grass that's established and growing.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from the table?
I'll just make a comment. Just one thing that's missing in this is the city conducted a survey last year on this topic.
Yes.
Which my recollection of it was that the citizens of Lewes who filled out that survey were overwhelmingly against, not against your specific proposal, but against the commercialization of the beaches generally. So I just want to put that sort of into the mix here.
Right. I mean, during this, I had people turn me down, but we were also able to have a conversation and talk about it and see why. One person signed it as an individual, but he wouldn't sign it as a commercial. He was like, I love this idea. He's just like, but at the other end of a commercial, he's a photographer. Okay, so, and
Right, all
So
I'm saying is that
there
this proposal this year has a history from last year.
yes.
Where we went down this road, we did a survey, we looked into it, and, I appreciate your
Yes.
recitation of the people you said were in support, but on the weighing against that is the survey that happened last year where people said, who weren't responding to you, objectively said this isn't something they wanted to do here in
Right.
Lewes. So,
Dennis, did you have a comment?
I just think that's the threshold question is, do we want concessions on the beach? Not that what you're presenting is not a good idea, and it's going to be a service to the people. I mean, I see your guys all the time. I live over there, and they do a great job. They're very respectful of people's property and things like that, and they're very busy. I'm just not sure that we want to consider concessions on the beach, because once we do that, it just opens the door. And I don't know if we want to commercialize our beach in that way. That's my thoughts.
My concern is one of the selling points was that people would ride their bicycles over to Roosevelt Inlet, and it would cut down on traffic, and I just don't buy that. I don't think people are going to get on bicycles just for this. They're going to have more cars coming if they do down to Roosevelt Inlet, and that, I think, is a problem. There are no restrooms down there. There are 2 porta potties, but there are no restrooms and other amenities to bring them down there. And this council, about a year ago, said we do not want to commercialize in any way the beaches. That was the council's decision. And it bothers me that we would kind of avoid that at this time if we allowed this to happen. That doesn't mean it's not a good thing, but I just don't know that it's a good thing for Lewes beaches at this point. And that's what troubles me, is that it wasn't that long ago that we made a decision, and now we're going to consider overturning it by allowing a viable business. I will agree to that, but just by allowing it to be commercialized, does that open a can of worms? And what do we say to the next vendor that says, I want to be able to rent my umbrellas and chairs and whatever down by the Children's Beach House?
And that's why there's a contract and it goes out to bid. So you get to define all of that, whether it's a 1 or 2 year or 3 year option, and it's whoever bids and the city approves. So if, just as in the state park, nobody else can go in there and rent a kayak because of us. And
Well, but-
every 3 years, it comes up for bid, so then it goes back to the public. So it's not,
But that's not the question. It's the how we select somebody. My question is, having not that long ago said we didn't want to have concessions on the beach, are we prepared to overturn that? That's my issue, not how we do it. And it doesn't say that your business is not a viable one or a good one.
Right.
But my concern is that are we prepared to now overturn a decision we made just months ago? So that's what's bothering me.
Mayor, I might, I think that the concerns that have been raised are all good, and I pay particular attention to that of our colleague who lives on the beach. I do think that we've been given more information this year. I think a whole lot. Matt, you've flooded us with good information. I thank you for all the trouble you've taken with this. And I would note that it's for a trial period. And so as a one-time thing, we can certainly review it, see whether it works, see whether we like it, and say, our concerns were valid. So, and we've had various thoughtful and concerned people from Parks and Rec, from Planning Commission, from the public, who've told us they think it's a good idea to try. So I'd be in favor of trying it as a 5-month experiment.
Are we allowing the camel to get its nose in the tent, and then it's too big to move? That would be sort of my concern is.
Dennis, you have anything else to say? You're the beach resident.
Now, I've gotten calls from the people on the beach, and they're opposed to it because of the clutter on the beach now, and this would only add to it. And I'll reiterate what Fred said, there's really not any amenities at Roosevelt Inlet. It's not a really good place to, if you're going to kayak, you can't, getting around into the canal and up the Broadkill or down the canal is going to be difficult through the inlet. It's pretty choppy in there for a kayak, and you know that.
That's one of our major
Yeah, that's a major
places to
impediment.
paddle.
So bring more, and I agree that I don't see anybody riding their bicycle up there because they can rent the stuff from you instead of taking it over. So I'm,
I can say most of the accommodations are for Lewes Yacht Club members and their families when they come down. Numerous, evening, the bonfires, that's one of the most popular requested places that we provide all the services. The kayaking, that basically, right now, our main 2-hour rental goes from Lewes Beach to Canal Front Park. So they do
Right.
that loop, so they do go through there, or vice versa if the canal's tide's going out. I think this gives us actually better safety in eyes on the water section as well.
and I
Or
can
get
separate
people
out the
to stop.
bonfires, because that's a great idea for you setting all of that up. I like that. But, because that really does help, you guys take good care of the beach. And some people get bonfires, they don't do the same good job.
Numerous. We've cleaned
So,
up
yeah,
numerous ones
like,
that we did not.
Keep that
even-
up,
We
regardless
didn't
of
even
what
have
happens here.
permits for, we cleaned up.
Right, I think if this isn't approved, I mean, your business, which is thriving, as I understand it, it'll continue. It's not like this puts an end to anything.
It will
This is-
continue.
You're just
It's going to. I
you're
mean, it's-
looking at a business
We're driving
opportunity.
40, yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
is a for-profit business, but it's, we drive 40 miles to the Roosevelt Inlet a day. 2 miles there, 2 miles back.
Right.
And it's like, and we can't accommodate everybody because by the time they see something, we drive back and they're like, oh, I just saw you drop this off. Can you come back? So we go back, and it's, so that's one aspect is for us, yes. One is to accommodate and allow the tourists and the locals a better experience at the beach. So that's the other end by us being there. And, I do believe it will alleviate some traffic. And it's also just going to add some accessibility for a lot of people because that's where we'll have a access chair and things like that as well. So that's, we're bringing more to the table than just the kayaks and stuff, but it's also the experience of the people staying there. Yes, they're driving there, but a lot of times they come down in 2 cars because one guy's got the 4 kayaks in the back and all the good, and the chairs and umbrellas, then the rest of the family comes in another car. So I see that all the time. So, yes, I mean, I wouldn't propose this if it was going to make my business harder. But at the same time, it's going to give the tourists and the customers and the locals a better experience.
And I thank you for all your work that you've put into getting this put together. We did vote against it last year because I think you came in with a very different proposal that involved not only here, but and there was concern about what was going to happen at Beach One. I think I would say that I appreciate everyone's conversation or comments here at the table. I don't think we're ever going to know whether or not this could be a successful successful operation if we don't give it a try. I would say if we were to do this, a 5-month operation with a review, a comprehensive review at the back end of it, but also on the front end, a contract that was very tightly organized to limit what you could or could not do would be a requirement. We are not talking about foodstuffs. We're not talking about anything like that, suntan lotion or beach towels. We're talking about things that are bulky. I think there's been a fair amount of support that I've heard from people to give it a try. So I think we could try it for a year without jeopardizing the ability to say nay going forward and see whether or not there's any merit in this. You would know whether it was profitable for you, and we would know whether it was disruptive to the city or if it actually produced a positive effect. So I understand your position. I recognize that we did vote against that last year, but there were different circumstances. So that's my thought on it. Thank you for putting all this work into it.
Let me ask a question. What does the city, will the city get any portion
absolutely.
of the revenue?
We'd have to sit down and negotiate a revenue.
The other thing, one of the concerns that we see happening on the beach, I'm told, is that people will put out their chairs on the beach early in the morning in order to claim part of the beach, and then 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they show up to occupy those chairs. And we got to make sure that everybody is there and there's somebody to occupy. If they're getting chairs from you, we're not putting them out reserving space, but we're putting them out that will be used, and when they finish, they're taken up. So there are issues that have to be ironed out in any agreement, because we just can't do.
Like a reservation at a restaurant. No, not seated till the party's there.
That's correct.
And, I've seen people put out, numerous chairs. We usually rent chairs in 2s, 3s, and 4s. The only time we have large amounts of chairs are when it is a evening bonfire party. And then that's when they're put out, and we don't start that till after 6. So,
Other comments from the table? Okay. Is there a motion?
Brett, I have a feeling this is kind of up to you.
Up to me, huh? Well, I think you've made a good case. I understand what the mayor's saying. And while I'm reluctant, I hope that this council, if it doesn't work, this council has the fortitude to say, that's it. But I'll go along with trying it for 5 months. But in saying that, I think that you must be aware that you'll be watched as to how it works. Because there are a lot of questions. There are people that don't want any more concessions, and I hope it's not opening a can of worms. But I'll move that we allow you a 5-month trial.
Can you make that subject to the
Subject
agreement?
to an appropriate agreement signed by the city and Quest that they meet all of the requirements, and if any time they're found to not be satisfying the requirements, we will shut it down immediately.
We can cancel it.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Well, can we have a discussion?
Sure.
Okay. If we're going to do this, I would like to ask the streets department, they're down there 3 days a week cleaning the beach. I'd like to get a report back from the streets department as to what they're finding, what the impact is on the beach. So you might want to help in that regard as well, because it's going to impact what's going on. And I'd also suggest that if we find that it's not working in less than 5 months, that there be a clause in the contract that will allow us to terminate it.
What does not working mean to you?
To me, it means that the beach is not capable of handling it, and that there's more trash down there that can be picked up. They pick up a lot of trash now. People carry stuff on the beach and they leave it there, they leave chairs there.
My intention would be to include a provision in the agreement that makes it the sole discretion of city council for a reason or no reason at all. If it's not working and you all agree that it's not for any reason whatsoever,
Canceled.
And I think, Dennis, I would accept the friendly amendment that the street department visit twice a week.
They do it now anyway. They're down there 3 days a week picking up
But I think we need to make that
trash.
part of the motion to make sure that that's done.
We get a
I
report
think
from
what, I
them.
think what he's asking for is, more importantly, if they already are down there sweeping, but I think what he's asking for is that they provide feedback.
Yeah, and I'm serious, if we find that it's not working, Matt, we'll shut it down immediately, and that'll be part of the contract.
How do you want to monitor parking?
Pardon?
How do you want to try to monitor parking?
Well, I think the police department's gonna have to monitor the parking, and that's part of making it work. And if parking becomes a serious issue, then there's something wrong. We can't,
Can you do that, chief?
Well, we do that every day. I don't know how I can evaluate the impact that this particular project will have on.
I think we listen to the police chief, and he comes in and says, hey, it's getting to be an intolerable situation for
I definitely would
parking.
be willing to have my
Yeah.
men and women also keep an eye
But,
for any possible issues and report back.
All right.
so
Thank
the
you.
burden's on you, Matt,
I'll take it.
okay?
But I just want to tell you, I'm still not persuaded, because it has nothing to do with you. I think you're a great guy, and it's a good commercial opportunity for you and all that. But these beaches are, one of the things that makes our beaches special, and not like other beaches in Delaware, is that they aren't cluttered with commercial establishments. And frankly, I have no doubt that you'll do a good job, but you're just the first. And after you, there's going to be the second. And after that, there's going to be the third. And so I'm not voting against you, I'm voting for the beaches, in my opinion, so.
I should mention to that point, the charter does specifically prohibit exclusive licenses or exclusive franchises. So it does raise a question about when the next one comes in, what obligation will city council possibly
How long
have?
did Katz have? What, 50 years? And I believe at the last session, the mayor brought up the concession in Bethany, which was 40 years. So the charter may say that, but let's talk about what really happens.
Part of the contract, I think, is that it's no foodstuffs, no sunscreen lotion and things that we could control.
Yes, Anne Marie.
One of the questions was about the fee, and in what Matt submitted, he had suggested a 7.5% payment to the city. So I don't know if you want
That
to.
that was on the 2019,
Right, that was,
Okay.
that was in the
Okay.
19th, yeah.
so, I mean, that is kind of disregarded.
Okay.
I'm on the 2020.
Okay,
And, it's, again, work with the proposal guidelines, so that was one of the main parts was payment to the city, Lewes Parks and Rec, or whoever, and that's ultimately determined by you guys.
Right, we'll have to determine that.
I have suggestions, kind of based on from like my previous business with the state parks, so that's,
I think you could
To be
provide the
answered.
information you're regarding what payment you're making to the state parks for our review,
yes.
for consideration, and we could work from there.
Fred, my comments were in case this passes, but I'm still not in favor of it, because I just don't think it's going to be good for the beach.
Okay.
Again, nothing against you, Matt, and the job you do, and your staff are very respectful of everybody's property.
I mean, I'm hoping to help declutter it, honestly, like with all the boats that people just randomly store, at least here, it might help if we can make it look more organized and nicer and not up in the dunes. Hopefully the dune rope will help at least keep them out of there. You know, it's one less, I just feel like we'll help starting to declutter it, and people will leave less chairs and stuff on every trash can, and the umbrella's broken and things like that. You know, because I see that all the time. You know, every beach we go to, we are cleaning up everything else. If we see trash, my guys are pulling the boats with a piece of trash with them. You know, I mean, they've been doing that for years, so.
I understand that.
And it was a difficult decision, and what swayed me was that we may be providing some service for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to fully enjoy the beach, and we'll see if it makes a difference and
Okay.
positive. But
We have a
my
nonprofit.
scales were not balanced, I can tell
We
you.
have a nonprofit called Mason's Mobility Mission. It is based after our son with special needs. It is new. It does not go to him. It goes to making accessibility to everybody else. So the idea was we can, you know, we just raised $4,000. We just started legally 3 months ago. All the paperwork came in. So with that, we just bought our first or second beach access chair. We had one donated to us 6 years ago, and that was the idea. We gave that out to everybody. People donated back. We put that into his fund. And now, this year, we've made it an established nonprofit, and we just bought a second chair, which is going to be designed for this location. It's free for everybody. They go online, they can make a payment, it goes to Mason's Mobility. We're looking to, you know, purchase roll-out mats that you have, but at the same time, those mats need some kind of shade or something, because everyone, if they're in a wheelchair, elderly, I mean, it's not just for a disabled, it could be someone who just had a knee replacement or something. They come out there and they're sitting in the middle of the sand in the desert, you know, in the hottest part. They're not even getting to enjoy the water. So that's where we want to provide sun shelter and things like that also, and that's all part of this, part of Quest, the side. All right?
Okay. So, any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
I may, and it's not anything to you, it's for the beach, as Bonnie's well stated.
Okay, Matt, I think you know all eyes are on you. And we'll look forward to a report probably in October from you as to, you know, and in the interim, we'll get reports from the Streets Department as to how things are going.
And then should I talk with next
Anne-
person before, and
Anne Marie and Allison will get this
Got it.
contract, and obviously Glenn. Okay?
yes, sir, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, then moving on to item I-1 is a presentation of possible action on annual assessment list for 2020, and if necessary, setting a date and time for hearing of appeals. We actually have 2 appeals that we've received, so we do need to schedule a hearing. I think we in the past, we have done these during the daytime, and I think we're looking at sometime in early March. Alice, did you pull up any dates that might work for us?
I don't have my calendar, but Anne Marie's gonna come.
Okay, Anne Marie, you want to talk to us about that?
So we could look at March 3rd, or March 4th.
If there's no rush on this, can we do it, have the half hour before the regular meeting?
Oh,
It just,
Well, you were having our executive sessions first, so.
That's true.
How far are you going to back up on this,
That's true.
Rob?
We got a budget meeting on Friday the 6th and
Oh.
Friday the 13th.
We could do it on Friday
We
the
do it
6th.
instead
well,
of them.
and on Monday, the 2nd, we have one on,
Yeah, I think you're just back that day, right, Rob?
no, I've been back a while by then.
Okay. Monday, the 2nd is a little tight for me.
Yeah,
Could we,
the 6th is better.
the 6th is
Okay,
better.
so
Do you want
the
to try and do
6th.
it on the 6th? Our
Do-
budget meeting is at 1. Do you want to try to do this at 11?
at 11.
Would that work
Works for me.
for you all?
Works for me.
Okay. Does that work for you, Fred?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could need a motion to set the appeal hearing for the 2 properties on March the 6th at 11 o'clock.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Great. Moving on to I2 is presentation and possible action on partial relief of the building permit fees for Dutchman's Harvest. Preston, you arrived at the right time. Thank you.
Okay, so I've put something in your packet that gives you, the schedule for the permit fee would be $2 per square foot, based on the 232,614 square feet. The total permit fee would be $465,228, which is a cost of $3,323.06 per unit.
Emery, that number's a little off right now. I think I don't know if the building got bigger or where your data's coming from, but
I've got it off of the last rendering you gave me.
so maybe you exclude balcony and storage or something from your calculation? Here's very detailed
Okay.
square footages
Okay,
of each building.
so I pulled it off of,
If it's not all square footage under roof, then your numbers may be right.
okay. Oh, I didn't have the one where it's 18,359. I didn't have anything at that. I had the 16,516.
Yeah, so that building, we decided we needed more 3 bedrooms about 8 months
Okay.
ago and changed that building to have, we got rid
Okay.
of a couple smaller units and added a couple bigger units.
Okay, so, all right. Well,
That still has all your numbers, like if,
okay. So, I mean, I think it's still from a relative standpoint, and that'll also be fine tuned as you do the building design, right?
it shouldn't change too much.
Okay.
I mean, it might change by 100 square feet total, but the building's pretty much,
So you have 3,
3 of the, I think the building 2,
which is the 16,500,
yeah, and then
16.
11 of building 1.
okay,
So total square footage is around 251,000 right now.
okay. So 251,000, so it would be just over $500,000 for the building permit. And
Right, you're basically 20,000 square foot more. than
No,
what-
but all the dollars, I mean, this is just.
I mean, it's all relative.
It's all relative.
It's all relative.
Okay.
Right.
And keep in mind, this is the same building 14 times.
Correct.
Right.
Which is important, because if like, each building is about $42,000, and if I was submitting 14 unique buildings,
Right.
this would be a tougher request to make.
Right.
But essentially, the
500.
second to the 14th building permit will literally be the person saying, is this the same building? Yes, it is, okay.
Right. Got it.
So it's not 232, it's,
Okay.
or the fee, okay. So the fee at full price would be $506,954. So,
Sorry, 506,954.
Did I miss something? Is
954.
there some addition to, is it like $1,000 plus $2 per square foot or something?
no, it's $2 per square foot, so if the square,
We had 11 at 18,000.
11 at 18,359,
The total, right?
oh,
It's right here at the top.
oh.
251,497.
Okay.
And then the total building permit using your calculation.
It's 588,
502, okay.
502,
The
yeah.
588 includes what I pay the farm marshal. and the-
Right, so the
Okay.
502 is what the portion of the building. Okay.
Okay. So, but again, I think it's still, it gives you a general sense, and then the per unit then, again, it would be a little bit more based on that.
Right.
Can I just try to recap what I understand? This is the first time I've seen this, of course. That the total building permit fees, if there were no concession, would be, from Lewes, $502,994.
Correct.
And if we reduced them to 50 cents a square foot, it would be It's about a quarter of the former
Exactly a
fees.
quarter.
Okay.
Exactly.
Apart from the amounts, you're looking to reduce the cost of the workforce housing units you're offering.
Correct.
You're also not looking to lose money. I'm having a little bit, and you're targeting a return of 15% of cost? If you're reducing your costs, then you're reducing your return. How-
Correct. My total dollar return goes down.
And you said your books will be open for audit and so forth.
Correct.
If you were the auditor, how would you look to make sure that this flowed through?
Because, so the way it's happening is I'm selling the units to Diamond State at our direct cost, minus the developer's fee. And I'm selling the units to third-party buyers at exactly 1.15 times my costs. So quite frankly, for every dollar that we save in the building permit, the price of the units goes down by $1.15, not by $1. And that's what I want audited. Actually, I want it audited because I want you guys and the public at large to know it was priced the way I said it would be. So we're still getting numbers coming in on with the vertical construction costs. We're still engineering the site, so we don't have hard numbers on site engineering. But once all those numbers are in and we have our budget, then we'll set the final pricing for the units. And what I've said before is if I end up charging Diamond State, or actually even third-party buyers more, because I have to make some assumptions when I go into it, like certain costs you may not know, and you still have to have a little bit of a contingency left in, even when you have your site work bid, you have all your vertical bids. And if for some reason I'm $250,000 high, as by my calculations and as verified by the city's audit, that's a check to Diamond State Community Land Trust. If I'm low, too bad for me. Like if I actually sold them at the end of the day for $1.14 or for a 14% profit, there's no way to recoup that. That's just too bad for me. But if it ended up being a tad high at the end of the day, then it's a check to Diamond State.
And so the reduction in the cost of the units, both to the third parties and to Diamond State, will mean that especially as to third parties, you're more likely to be able to sell them quickly.
Correct.
But you're going to make a little bit less money.
Correct.
A little bit of reduction in risk, a little bit of reduction in return.
Right. And there's a deeper kind of story here, and I don't know how much time you guys have allocated to this agenda item. But the project is handicapped by a number of factors. It's handicapped by its location. It's handicapped by its architectural design. It's handicapped by its relative size for a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 1-bedroom unit. And what I mean by that is when HUD and Delaware State Housing Authority do a calculation as to what's affordable to somebody making, let's say, 80% of area median income in Sussex County, that calculation is exactly the same if you're buying a 2-bedroom, 800 square foot, very simple architecture townhome in West Delmar, or if you're buying a 1,500 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a big garage with beautiful architecture in a Class A location in the city of Lewes. You get, so the price that they say you have to sell that unit for is the same. So you get no credit for the garages. These garages are huge.
Right.
If you see the square footages on that page, and that's mainly due to the architectural style, you don't get any credit because of location. You can't say, well, hold on a sec, I'm actually in the city of Lewes. This isn't, in some otherwise area that people expect someone to build a quote-unquote affordable housing. So we're sitting here working with the architectural styles we have, working with the land cost we have, and everything else, and trying to make those numbers work in the same way a nonprofit affordable housing developer in the western part of the county might make a very simple, boxy 2 or 3 bedroom townhome try to work. So I guess what I'm saying is we're looking at every opportunity for savings, and to the extent that the city of Lewes can play a role in that and help us get these prices down, we'd really appreciate it.
Chris, have you gone to the county on their side? Because they don't do any inspection, but they still charge you.
I know. And the answer is I have, and I don't have an official response yet, but the unofficial response is not promising.
Shocking.
So I'm verifying, I've been told, and Janelle might be able to chime in on this, that
I think Janelle's gonna stay away from that one.
They have never discounted for Habitat for Humanity, for other nonprofits. for groups like that, instead of taking what they told me at face value, I'm actually out there making phone calls to all these groups to say, have you ever gotten a discount? I'm trying to find somebody that has, so I can say, oh, that's not true. This person got a discount. And then I'll go back and make an official request, but as you can see, their number's so nominal, the fire marshal's not gonna deduct it. I'm not even sure legally the fire marshal can
Right.
reduce his. But the county fee is so nominal that even if they waived it entirely, it's not nearly as meaningful as you guys kind of coming down to 25 cents as opposed to 50 cents.
My question is, if at 50 cents per square foot, it's gonna cost you, $9,000. How does that get distributed what impact does that have on each unit? I know the total has an impact for you and the builder and the
So
total
the-
cost of the buildings, but how does this get translated into how it impacts the price of each unit?
So all expenses are allocated for the vertical construction based on square foot under roof. For site, land, and soft costs, you can't entirely allocate it based on square footage because
No.
it actually makes the bigger units oddly expensive and the smaller units oddly inexpensive. You actually have to split it, so we kind of have split it. And we allocate some just on a per unit basis. So certain soft costs, you just say, hey, that's divided by 140, and that's how much you allocate to each unit, whether it's a one-bedroom unit or a three-bedroom unit. And then other costs that you feel are relative to the size of the unit. I'm trying to think of a good example for that. We used to do it with amenities, but we allocate those more based on square footage. But you get down to a price where, once we drop this in the model, and actually have this calculation in here, but I'm a little reluctant to share it, just because it has a lot of other detail in it that I'm afraid a year from now, someone will say, well, you said this was gonna cost exactly that.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I drop, if you guys offer this reduction, I immediately drop it in the model. It immediately reprices every single unit based upon that. I think the bigger units will come down a tad more, and the smaller units will come down a tad less, but as a percentage of their current expected sales price, it's about the same.
So if I understand this correctly, it's, that, and maybe I've got this wrong, but I'm trying to go back and forth between these two documents. The Lewes fee is $2 per square foot, right? That's the fee schedule? Okay.
Right.
So I appreciate that you've got some proprietary information, but if we were to reduce this fee, say, 50% or 75%, which I think is what you're asking, it's the 75% number, what would that translate into? I think this is Fred's question, into a reduction in the sales price roughly of a three-bedroom, a two-bedroom, and a
It's
one-bedroom?
significant. It's like 3,500 to 4,000 a unit.
For each,
Probably closer to 3,500. So.
for
if you-
which reduction? For the 75% reduction?
75%, yeah.
What if it was 50%?
Then it'd be about I think I might have given them all out. If I can look at it, I can tell you exactly.
There you go.
Monty, I think 75% is actually the 50 cent.
Right.
And 87.5% reduction would be 25 cents.
Okay,
Yeah, exactly.
so
Yeah,
we've
so,
got per building, but we don't have is per unit.
yeah, sorry. Just
Okay.
try to take that per building number and divide it by,
So we've
10 in
got
your
the
head.
25, we've got if we only charge 25 cents instead of $2, we've got if we only charge 50 cents instead of $2 per building, per project cost. And my question is, what if we split it? What if we went half? And we took only half of the price, which I can see an argument for because it's 14, while we have to do all the inspections, it's 14 identical buildings.
then it's about $2,100 a unit.
Yeah.
Just
$2,100,
a unit.
okay. For if-
Well, multiply by 1.15, which, so
Okay.
2,300.
23,
At-
almost 24.
If the city's fees is halved?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
And just to remind you guys, even though I know it's not entirely relevant, the Lewes Board of Public Works did what amounted to a $472,000 discount which was about $3,700 a unit.
But didn't you shift all those costs over to the assisted
Some of
living?
them I did, but I didn't shift them all.
Well, how many did you shift and how many didn't you?
I shifted maybe 1,500
1,500 out of what?
per unit.
Per-
So if it was $3,700 a unit, I shifted about 1,500 and they discounted about 2,200.
Okay, so they said you can, we don't care where you recover your
But keep in mind, the
costs.
shifting was because the senior living facility was gonna otherwise have to pay for a pump station and do other improvements on Kings Highway.
Right.
That it no longer has to do, because it's running it through us. So,
Right.
yes, I shifted it on them, but the price to the net cost to the senior living facility was about the same. They saved about $500,000 on, actually, I mean, that.
My only point is that, and maybe I misunderstood this, but the Board of Public Works' agreement to the changes with the pump station and with the flow and all of that, did that result in a reduction in payment to the Board of Public Works?
Yes, but that's not where the bulk of the savings comes from.
I'm sorry? No, I get that, but
Yeah.
all I'm saying is if we, the analogy,
I know
if
what
we,
you're saying,
if we
and your-
reduce.
Your point is a good point.
Right, if we reduce our fee, that is money that we won't, the city will
Realize.
not realize.
True.
Which it would otherwise realize. And I don't think that's the same as what happened with the Board of Public Works situation. Maybe I'm mistaken.
There's a portion that was essentially just a reduction from them, but there is also a big portion that came from the kind of maneuvering and changing of the way the project was engineered.
Well, but if you're using them as an example, I'm trying to gauge what kind of reduction it was, for example, to a different public body.
Yeah, if you're looking at it from their perspective, it was probably closer to around 2,000
Per unit,
per unit.
which would be a what percentage? Just so I have.
Which would be $280,000,
But per unit, it was 2,000.
yeah.
I didn't quite get that.
I'm still not following how that works out. I'm
Well, there's
sorry.
140 units in the project.
Yeah.
If each unit goes down by
It's
$2,000,
280,000.
280 over what?
the entire project.
What's the percentage? In other words, if you're asking us to reduce,
Oh,
Ours,
well, I
but
mean,
to-
but theirs is entirely, see, here's the big
Entirely
difference too.
different. Yeah.
okay,
Theirs is
if it's entirely different, we don't have to go any further.
Well, no,
It
but
doesn't
this is a good- You're
matter.
making a point, and I want to make a point back.
Fair enough.
This was a reimbursement of their direct costs.
Right.
This isn't them banking this money and sticking it in their
Right,
pocket.
no, I know.
So if we actually looked at how much cost you guys have associated with having a civil engineer or structural engineer review our plans once for 14 different buildings, I guess what I'm trying to say, the Lewes Board of Public Works, with the exception of a fee that they charge for their plant and stuff like that, which is harder to cost out, a lot of these costs are just a direct payment to their budgeted items for the sewer extension.
Right.
It's just a simple pass-through.
Right, and they got reimbursed for those direct costs.
Right.
Okay, that's fair. That helps me understand why these are different
But they
situations.
did allow, it's kind of complicated, they did allow some changes that did result in a direct savings to us by assuming that the number of EDUs on other parcels either went up or down relative to their initial calculations. So it kind of put more, or it put essentially less of the burden on our property. Those were changes they didn't have to make. There were reasons behind why we thought those
Right.
were the correct changes to make, but that's probably more complicated than, I guess, I don't think the city of Lewes will incur, let's just say you did reduce it to $62,000. I would be very surprised if the cost to the city of Lewes were even a quarter of that, to review the actual plans and pay you whatever. I don't know if it's someone on staff or if it's someone you hire a third party, but to review these plans and essentially say that they're okay and that they meet building code will not cost that much.
But you'll still have, not to review, beyond the reviewing of the plans, there's the inspection that goes on top of that.
True.
Well, the plan review is separate, that's a different
Yeah, that's true.
$250 fee.
Okay.
And they're reviewed by the building officials.
Right.
But the standard cost is $2 a square foot.
Correct.
for a single-family home.
That's for the permit, that's over, the review fee is $250.
Right,
Right.
okay, so,
$2 a square foot for buildings that have 3 or more attached units in it. Correct. It would actually be less, and my problem is, the initial calculation I was using was the other one.
Was the $1
So I thought I was
square
coming in
foot.
asking for a discount on a total fee of like $300,000
Right.
or something.
Right.
And only to be corrected by Anne Marie 3 or 4 weeks ago that actually, no, you need to pay a lot more than that.
Right. Yeah, you were using the $1 per square feet for a detached house, yeah. Okay. Other questions? Rob, do you have others?
No, that's all I had, thank you.
Okay.
If we, it seems that we're kind of looking at between 50%, 50 cents per square foot, 25 cents per square foot.
Excuse me.
What if we said, let's set it at $7,500 per unit, period.
For $7,500 per unit?
Well, I mean, per building. Something in between, say, 7,000, whatever, we just set a number and say, that's what we'll charge per building.
May I ask,
Some math on that.
Anne Marie, do you, you've been looking at the budget implications of this.
Okay. Yes, sorry.
No, I'm,
We were just doing a little math.
good. You've been looking at the budgetary implications of this. Do you have a recommendation, or do you have any information for us on how this will affect the budget?
Well, we have not budgeted what we believe to be the full load of this in the budget, partially because of our concern about building an operating budget on revenues that aren't going to be sustained. So I don't believe it would affect in an adverse way the operating budget to reduce it. However, what we are looking at is anything over what we've budgeted for building permit revenue. Our recommendation is to transfer that to the general capital projects account. So it would be less money that would be available for capital projects.
And Preston has suggested a 25 cent per square foot or 50% cent per square foot. That's a very large reduction in both cases. Did you have any reaction to have you seen those two requests before?
No, but, so what, the other permit that we're expecting will come in next fiscal year, that's going to be a big permit, is the assisted living side. So, again, similar to the Board of Public Works, there will be, based on this piece of land, there will be a large influx of income to the city for the building permits, the transfer tax, and all of those things. Now, the transfer tax goes into a separate fund. So I don't think that by reducing it, that it's going to create an adverse effect in terms of being able to meet the need. This and the assisted living, however, are part of the impetus for needing to add another building official. So we are anticipating
It's a long-term
cost,
Year
a
over year.
long-term cost due to the current volume plus these two very large projects.
And has Preston indicated whether he's going to be asking for a break on the assisted living facility permit fees?
I don't believe there will be any justification for that.
There absolutely would not.
I mean, that's just a
That number's-
full-on
that number's very-
for-profit.
That number's big.
Thanks.
It's like, I think it's 225,000 times 2.
So,
Thank you, President. Mayor, my own feeling is, I didn't like the rezoning that allowed this project to happen because of density and traffic, but since we've approved it, I'd like to make it work. And I would propose that we be generous and charge 25 cents a square foot.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Well, I'll just say for the record, that's, just so people understand, that means we're collecting $377,245 less than would be the standard fee for this kind of a building.
It's a very
I appreciate that it'll create a reduction of some sort in the per unit cost to the ultimate purchaser. But it's a large dollar reduction in what the ordinary fee would be.
Right.
I mean, I'd be a lot more comfortable with 50 cents, which would be,
Well, then it's 125,000. 125,000.
right, 125,749 instead of
Correct.
62,000. I'm sorry, my math is off, it's actually more than that.
Yeah.
Be the reduction. I was looking at the 50 cents. Sorry, I was thinking about what I was thinking about instead of what you.
Yeah.
It'd be another 60,000, so the overall reduction in the,
440,000.
thank you,
440,000.
400, so it's 400 and,
440.
we'd be foregoing 440,000 and collecting $62,874. So I'd be a lot more comfortable at the 50 cents. It's still an enormous contribution by the city to this undertaking.
This effort. You know, I think all of us want to support and do what we can to support affordable housing, but we also, again, Marie's called the idea that we're going to be incurring probably the hiring of an additional building official.
Right.
So your inclination is?
My
to go down to
inclination is
50
more to the
cents?
50 cents.
Dennis,
Want to amend your motion?
if you're willing,
I am,
okay, then let's do it to 50 cents.
and I'll second that motion again.
Thank you.
I think that's it still is, nearly $400,000 contribution by the city, by the people of Lewes to this project, which I think is for a budget of, what are we at?
for the city?
Yeah.
About 7,000,
Just
or 7 million,
Around
7 million.
Yeah, 7,000.
It's a considerable.
Get the zeros.
It's a considerable amount of money to pass up to try to assist with this workforce housing initiative.
I think that's a serious
I think it's a good way.
contribution towards the creation of workforce housing without penalizing the city unduly.
Well, there's 3,000 people in this town, so you do the math. That's, for 3,000 people, that's a $400,000 contribution. You all can figure out where that leaves it. I think that's pretty substantial.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Good luck, Preston.
Preston, good luck. Thank you. We didn't hear from Helen. I assume, Helen, this is a very favorable condition for you.
It's a very favorable condition. If I may add, it does help me take this to the state. Mm-hmm.
Yes, please share the fact that the city is very interested in this project, clearly from what we've done here. We're trying to do what we can to support it and yet be prudent.
It does give impetus to conversations with the county and with the state, and we have to start somewhere, and it looks like the ball was thrown back this way, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
So, I think we move on then to item I3, which is presentation of possible action on the Lewes Planning Commission recommendation number 633 to deny a request for a waiver to Chapter 170-27 Streets H cul-de-sac 5. The maximum length of a permanent dead-end street is 200 feet. As part of the Lewes Waterfront Preserve Major Subdivision, Sussex County Tax Map 335-8.00-17.00. This came before the Planning Commission. Tom, do you have anything you want to add to this? It was
Sure.
denied on a 5-3 vote with one.
Yeah, it's a couple points to for clarification. So this is a waiver request that's part of a major subdivision that's before it's back in for final plan review at the Planning Commission. This waiver request is from a provision of our subdivision code. Under the cul-de-sac provision, it says that no dead-end street can be more than 200 feet in length. And as you mentioned, the Planning Commission's recommendation was to deny the request by a 5-3 vote. There was quite a bit of discussion on the impact of a street that's longer than 200 feet and what's the rationale for it. Part of it is emergency access and getting to properties. There was discussion about the number of units in this particular development, looking at it, and I think that the Planning Commission was looking at some of the information, and we had discussions about how does 200 feet, what's the rationale for it, how does it relate to other developments. So they took the vote that night. I would, and their recommendations in the packet, as is the waiver request from the applicant. The applicants are here. I would say that also in your packet, Janelle and I took a look at the 200 feet. What is the rationale for that? It is, most codes have a maximum length for dead-end streets, cul-de-sacs. And it is about health, safety, welfare, getting to properties. If you go down a long street and you're in the wrong place, especially in an emergency situation, it's a problem. So that's what a lot of the planning standards are based around, and how to lay neighborhoods out. In your packet, we looked at how does that relate to regulations in this area, and also streets in the city itself. So you'll see that the letter talked about the length of streets by the state, which is 500 feet to 1,000 feet. In the county, it's up to 1,000 feet. We also looked at the International Building Code, that's 750 feet. And there's a list, and I don't know if you want me to read them, but there's quite a few streets already in the city that are over 200 feet.
But
200.
did those exist before the restriction was put in?
So we're not quite sure when the restriction was put in, but some of these streets are relatively new. So
I mean, like the ones in Pilot Town? Seagull,
Texas is new.
Ocean View?
Right.
And some of the streets you mentioned, they're not really comparable, I don't think.
Yeah, but Mariners Retreat is.
Sure, I can't find the letter that you wrote. But for instance, it was, I think Port Lewis was mentioned. It was called Point Lewis, but you meant Port Lewis. Those have big turnarounds as part of the street.
Right, and they're not comparable. The one thing that we did want to put those, we included those, they're not exactly apples to apples. Part of the concern was the number of units, and that's what the standards are based on, is the length, but also how many units would that single street be serving if they became blocked. So those were the examples we use where there's quite a bit of number of dwelling units on a single access street that dead ends, even if it's a bigger turnaround.
And is there
Oh, I'm
any
sorry.
objective criterion, or is this just kind of a judgment call of how long is too long?
Well, there is standards for a lot of transportation. The state puts them out, the Institute for Traffic Engineers, so there are standards.
But what are the standards based on? I mean, is just how long it takes to drive down the street and find yourself at a dead end? Is there any?
It's that, but also how many units are on that street itself. And it's not a standard, because in areas, even in Lewis, there's different neighborhoods with different, like in the city itself, in downtown, there's a different street network built up, the zoning's different. So those are variables that I think factor into how long would a road be. Out in rural areas, you may have bigger lots, so you have less units on a longer street. So I think it's varied by the land use patterns that are in place and the surrounding area. But there are standards that fall within a range of that. We did look at how 200 feet relates to those, and it's on the shortest end of it. Right. So 200 feet, we didn't find any other ones that are 200 feet. And I've asked around, I don't know, when this came about, what was the original objective for 200 feet? What I have learned or understand is that when you're in a city with grid streets, and if there's infill development, it is often common that there be a short cul-de-sac that might be a transition between the grid network of the city and either the areas immediately adjacent to it or within the city itself. And it's not uncommon to see a dead-end street that's that short with more units on it. But it's not in the communities that, like the county and other areas where you don't have that much density, typically dead-end streets, it's a different land use pattern, and you don't see cul-de-sacs of that length in those areas.
How was this applied to a Mariner's Retreat?
I didn't look at the conditions, I wasn't here then, but those roads are longer than 200 feet, and they're dead ends, because again, there's wetlands in the middle of it.
Right.
It couldn't be a through street.
So those are definitely dead-end streets.
Correct.
Yeah, but there was, as you recall, whether to have a through street or not was one of the big issues there.
Right.
And
Right.
the decision was you couldn't have a through street, that's why we had dead-end streets.
Right.
But the ordinance doesn't say why you have to end the street. I don't care what the reason is for having to end the street. The fact that you got a wetlands, but you can't, the street is a dead-end street. Period.
Is there a
You have a
difference?
cliff.
Oh, I don't disagree with you,
Yeah.
I'm just
I'm
saying
just
that.
saying, the reason for it is not the issue.
Well, I think it is, I think it is, I disagree with you, I think it's very relevant. I mean, I think, I'm not sure that you can import, for example, in a rural area where you may have a long road that was because that's where the farms were, who knows? And as Tom just said, has a couple of farmhouses on it. I don't know that a limitation in a rural area is transportable to a more urban area. I mean, I'm not sure that really is a
I'm
one
talking
for
about
one.
miles.
And quite frankly, look, let's face it, a lot of this has to do with what influenced the lawmakers in the first place to come up with these long one-way streets or dead-end streets. We don't have any information on that I'm aware of at all. We have a number of different standards, and I absolutely take what you say, which is Lewis's 200 feet is on the short end of the continuum, or the shorter end of I'm not quite sure how that works, but we're short. But somebody at some point in Lewis said that's the go-by, and that's what we've got. So I'm not wild about the idea of just throwing it out the window because other places have a longer one.
Right, and I think that I think that it's important to note that it's in the subdivision ordinance, and I don't know how it was treated in Mariner's Retreat, if a waiver request was done then. Usually, that's the process like this, that you come in and you say.
Yeah, if I remember the way the Mayor's Retreat thing went, it was that I thought it was in the subdivision code, but perhaps I'm misremembering, there was a strong disapproval for cul-de-sacs at all.
In general, yeah.
So what we've got here is cul-de-sacs, I assume, at the end of these three long roads.
On some of them, not entirely.
Okay,
Yeah.
Red Cedar, Red
Right.
River Birch, and
Right.
East and River Birch West. So if I recall the Mariner's Retreat discussion, it was around the code's disapproval for cul-de-sacs at all, and that was what was the through street discussion.
That's probably
If I
true.
remember
But we need
correctly.
to consider the magnitude of the problem. One of the cul-de-sacs in this is 210 feet long.
Right.
One of the other cul-de-sac is 497 feet long. They're not that long. Now, the third street is expected to be a continuation into the potential development of the adjacent land. And what troubles me is that we talk about the volume of traffic that would be coming down this dead-end street. I'm going to take Canary Creek development, for example. you've got one way in, one way out, and you've got, what, 120, 130 units back there. Now, it's one way in, one way out. I don't care, it's not a dead-end street, but you've got a street there that's, how long, 750 feet, 1,000 feet? It's going to have to carry all of that traffic if there's an emergency. So my concern is, why are we taking one position on a dead-end street, but we don't take the same position when you have a subdivision with a long entrance into that subdivision, and it's one way in and one way out, the only way. So that troubles me, that we've got two different criteria for the same sort of problem. And to me, that's inconsistent.
I think the one thing from planning design instructions that I've listened to or taken into consideration, you have to look at each regulation in a whole. So I think the important thing of development design is the layout on the tract itself. And different tracts have different, if it's downtown, it's different than when it's surrounded by wetlands or woodlands. And those are important because a lot of the objectives is to have development that's managed with the site itself. So each site can present challenges, and in an area without many constraints, you can maintain a grid network. There's not many constraints, and it's often more efficient and works well, and you don't want to have long streets that you go way down and come back on. In other areas where there's open space to be maintained or natural resources, you want the design, or usually the design is dictated by how to fit any impacts into that property, so it has, how to fit development into it so it has the least impacts. So when you look at this is a standard that is important, and it's important for health, safety, welfare. If you carry it through to all areas, though, it may have unintended consequences, that when you're trying to deal with where's the best places for open space or natural resources, and your road network is kind of a factor that could limit that's something to take into consideration. So I think lot layout is important. Road layout and access is also important, but I think you have to take them all as a whole and not look at one standard, one size can fit all across the community. And it's probably worked in Lewes because most of the developments have been downtown, but now our developments are
Suburban.
moving out. And we have two other developments in the queue that, by their current configuration, they will be coming in for the same request because the roads are longer than 200 feet.
Keep in mind that because this is in a annex res zone, we are requiring 50% open space, which is larger than any other zone for this kind of development. And I think that needs to be, I think it leads itself to what you've just said, and that is, by requiring so much open space, we have narrowed the amount of land available for development. And also that controls then the type of layout that you can put in that. So I think we have to keep in mind that we have a constraint on this development of a large amount of open space, more than we require of any other zone. And I think we have to take that into account as well.
Mayor, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot that goes into this.
That's right.
We've got an ordinance. As Bonnie said, we don't know why it was framed or why we chose 200 feet. Tom brings out a lot of interesting factors, so does Fred. So did the Planning Commission. I mean, even the votes to approve it, two of them cited the Y turnaround design concern. I think that we shouldn't do these as one-off after one-off after one-off, but we should take this back to the drawing board.
When you say back to the drawing board, what do you mean?
examine the ordinance to see what kind of discretion we want to build into the ordinance, if any? Or do we want to stick with a strict 200-foot limit? Or do we want to make waivers available on certain specific criteria? Like the way the turnaround is designed, the width of the street, the number of houses along the street, all the factors that we've heard may apply.
I understand that, but I guess I would raise the question. We have allowed things like Mariners Retreat in the last year, and we didn't raise this question. Why is it being raised at this point? You know, it's just a basic question to ask.
I think Bonnie answered that as to Mariner's Retreat. As to the others, I don't know.
Well, I don't think, I don't, just because there's a wetlands at the end of the street, there's no reason for giving an exemption when they didn't even ask for it. We didn't even question it. Now, all of a sudden, we're questioning it, and that's what that raises a question in my mind as to why now we want to question it when we didn't with the previous subdivision that came in. And I think that's a normal question to ask.
But I mean, I think maybe it's useful the developer is the one who's requesting the waiver, and as I read the basis for it in the January 31st, 2020 letter from somebody, from Mr. Fuqua.
He's here.
Under factual, I mean, we go from factual basis to conclusion, and the paragraph says, it gives two reasons, as I understand it, for granting the waiver. The first is, the Lewes Waterfront Preserve site plan would be unable to accommodate the residential density permitted by right in the AX Res District Option 2 cluster development. And then two, and the city's objectives is clearly stated in the purpose section of AX Res zoning district. So on the one hand, they can't build every single unit that they'd like unless they get the waiver. And second, are the objectives, and I think this is what you were getting at, Fred, in the zoning district, and those objectives citing section 197-43.1 B as in boy 2 through 4 are, as paraphrased in this letter, of conserving open land such as wetlands and floodplains by setting them aside from development, minimizing, which may in fact have been what we ended up doing in Mariners Retreat. You might not have realized we were doing it, but setting aside from development, minimizing impacts on sensitive environmental resources and conserving scenic views, and reducing the length of roads, utilities, and the amount of paving and impervious surface. Those are the purposes, and then the letter says those would not be accomplished unless the waiver is granted, right? So you got two purposes given: building every unit, and the reason for the AX Res, which is, as you were saying, Fred, which is to try to cluster the development in one spot and have more open space. So those are the bases that are given in this instance for granting the waiver. And again, the waiver, the distances cited by the applicant are 497 feet, 210 feet, and then there's the one that might be a through someday at 540 feet. So that's what the applicant has to say here.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Jim? Absolutely. Please.
Mayor, could you be cognizant of our time? I know Mr. Fuqua is an eloquent speaker, but he can go on.
It's funny you should say that, actually, because, well, for the record, my name is Jim Fuqua. I represent Setting Properties, Inc. My letter speaks for itself. You all have a copy of that. And obviously, you've been discussing a lot of issues, including should it be 200 feet, should it be that? I'm here tonight on a specific waiver request for this specific application. So that's the issue before the mayor and council tonight. in my notes, as a starting point, I was going to mention that I have been told, and Janelle can confirm this, that I talk too much. All right? So I acknowledge
Not
that.
too much. You talk well, Mr. Fuqua.
And I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk too much tonight, because I think this waiver request is totally justified by the purpose clause of the AX residential zoning district as it's stated in your zoning code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly summarize basically what I said in the letter for the council and the people here tonight. And then if you have any questions or want some more detail, I'll be happy to go into that. Now, as to our waiver, and these are all specific things in your code, the mayor and council have authority to grant waivers from the zoning ordinance and the requirements of the code.
From the subdivision.
From the subdivision,
Subdivision, yeah.
the development code. If the strict compliance with those regulations result in two different things, there's two different ways to do it. One is extraordinary hardship on the applicant, and the other one is, or if it's some type of difficulty to the objectives of the city. So that's the criteria that's stated in the waiver provision of the code. In this particular case, the failure to grant the waiver basically results in both of those things: hardship to the applicant and failure to reach the objectives of the city. As to the applicant, the Lewes Waterfront Preserve was designed to meet or exceed the requirements and purposes of the AX residential zoning district. And that takes me back away. The last time I think I appeared before you was 15 months ago, when we annexed the Brittingham property and rezoned it AX residential. And as you recall, because you were the ones that did it, there was quite an involved process that resulted in the adoption of that zoning district. There was a reason for it to encourage annexation. As far as I know, I believe Mr. Setting's the only one so far that's utilized that annexation process. So we're kind of still the test case on everything. But when you created that zone, there's a very clear, specific goal that the city had in creating that AX residential zoning district. The goal was to cluster development on the most suitable portions of the site and to minimize impacts on the environmentally sensitive areas of the site. Now, going back to trying to get as much as we can, when that ordinance was passed, it provided the permitted density. So that's the permitted density. When we came in on annexation, we were told, and the law states, that's the density that's permitted. So we're not reaching for anything we're entitled to. That is the permitted density of this development. In fact, the permitted density is 90 units. The proposed plan is 89 units, so it's actually one under. And you don't have the site design in front of you, but the site design is exactly as, not exactly, but basically the same as was submitted on day one. And that is the entire project is basically clustered on approximately 1/3 of the property, which would be the western 1/3. When we did that, as you know, again, there's provisions in the code, specific provisions as to buffers and things of that nature. And without this waiver, we basically can't design this to meet the city's purposes and to meet the density that's permitted. So the purpose clause, and I think this is critical, the purpose clause of the AX residential district is set forth in section 197-43-1 of the zoning ordinance. And it states that the purpose of the district, and I quote, "It's to conserve open space, open land, including those areas containing unique and sensitive natural resources such as woodlands, streams, floodplains, and wetlands by setting them aside from development. It's to provide development options for landowners which minimize impacts on sensitive environmental resources, reduce disturbance of natural and cultural features, and conserve scenic views." And it states, in that district, it's to provide greater design flexibility and efficiency in the setting of services and infrastructure, including the opportunity to reduce the lengths of roads, utilities, and the amount of paving and impervious surfaces required for residential development. So that was the criteria that the mayor and council created when they passed that ordinance, and I I'll go back because I reread all this. As you recall, the mayor and council set up an ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee came up with this. They held 24 meetings. That was sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission, or Planning Commission. Planning Commission had 3 meetings. Planning Commission unanimously recommended adoption of this, and the council and mayor unanimously adopted this. And that's about where we came into the picture, about a year and a half ago. So we designed this exactly as your ordinance indicates. In fact, we exceeded what your ordinance indicates because that was the purpose of this. We have excluded this entire development out of the floodplain. The entire development is in Zone X, out of the floodplain. So not only is the buffers required, all the requirements of the ordinance are met, but we've exceeded it. And believe me, when we went through the Planning Commission, there were people who were concerned with flooding, they're concerned with sea level rise and everything else. We wanted to get away from that, and which we thought was exactly what the code called for. And again, as I said, the AX residential district itself recognizes that greater design flexibility is appropriate to accomplish the goals stated by the council. We need the waiver to do that, and as I said, it accomplishes our goals and your goals. As was stated in my letter, we're asking for Red Cedar Drive East to be about 497 feet, River Birch Drive East to be 210 feet, and then there is that kind of unusual situation with River Birch Drive West, because at the request of the Planning Commission, we set it up with an easement to connect to the property next door for a future road possibly. By definition under your code, it's not a dead-end street because a dead-end street is something that will be a permanent dead-end street. So, but that aside, we're also asking a waiver that could be 540 feet until such time, obviously, as it's completed. We also are requesting a, what I call a T turnaround, but it's a one backup type turnaround there. So that's basically our request. And I was going to at that point turn it over to you, but you've already had some discussion, so I just want to add a couple other things to that. The memo that Tom mentioned about other streets in Lewes, I was thinking the same thing, and I think, I didn't see that until today, but I was kind of thinking along the same lines. Are there other streets like that? So first of all, and you're all familiar with where this is, directly across New Road on the other side, in the county. All right, there's 3 streets there. They're all cul-de-sacs.
All dead end.
There's Blue Heron Drive. That's about, and I scaled these from the tax map, so I'm approximating these. Blue Heron Drive is about 250 feet. Creekside Drive's approximately 900 feet, and Schaefer Lane's approximately 1,100 feet. So they're directly on the other side of New Road. As I said, they're in the county, so the city never had anything to do with this. But that is the nature of the area. So I also recognize I better look at the city and see if I can, see what streets I could find in the city. Now, it didn't have to look too far, because in fact, all we had to do was look across Canary Creek to Pilottown Village, which is about the closest development to the site. There's several dead-end streets in Pilottown Village. Pintail Court is approximately 230 feet. Hornbill Court is approximately 370 feet. Canary Court is approximately 400 feet. And Ocean View Court, which actually is the closest street to us, is 450 feet. With a T turnaround at the end.
How many houses are on that?
From here, it looks like about 8 or 9.
And how many are going to be on these?
Well, again, these are townhouse units, so they're not single-family lots.
How many units are going to be on them?
I think on the biggest one, maybe about 23 or 24, I think.
Okay.
So, and Pilottown Village, and again, I don't know when that was done, but obviously, just from the appearance of it, it's not
80s,
an old development.
late 80s,
40 years?
35, yeah.
The other thing, going to the, I don't know why Lewes has a 200-foot requirement, and, you know, that's up to Lewes what they want to have. But I can tell you this, and Tom had this in the memo that was submitted. The DELDOT rules and regulations for subdivision streets, Section 10, recommends a maximum length for permanent dead-end streets from 500 to 1,000 feet. The Sussex County subdivision ordinance permits dead-end streets of 1,000 feet.
Placed it back in the turnaround.
The Sussex County subdivision ordinance, as well as the state requirements, all permit turnarounds, T-turnarounds, which are basically one backup movements.
Right.
All right, these are for all fire vehicles in the state of Delaware.
Right.
They permit that, or a cul-de-sac, so it's an either-or situation.
Okay.
Again, going back to the legal standard for the waiver, you created the AX residential district for a purpose. We designed this to accommodate that purpose. There's trade-offs in any type of a comprehensive plan or a law or any kind of policy. You can't have everything. So if you said you can't have these streets, then we're out. I know you can't see this very good, but there's the development. All right. The yellow is basically the area that is in the floodplain, but the buffers are shown here. The buffers are on here. So all that yellow area is actually area in the floodplain. We are totally out of that area intentionally if we didn't have those streets, we got to in the floodplain, which is exactly what we were told not to do. So I hope you see the bind we're in, trying to accommodate what we thought was the city's wishes, all right, and clearly were those wishes. And as I said, this plan isn't something we changed. This is a plan we walked in here on day one with. As far as the recommendation from the Planning Commission, I don't think, I was not there, so I don't know, what conversations occurred there. All I have are the comments in the report to you. But again, I mentioned the legal standard. I don't think that was discussed. The purpose clause of the AX residential wasn't discussed. And the fact that the AX residential says there should be planning flexibility in that design to accommodate your goals. So that's my pitch, and if you have any questions or want me to go into any more detail, just let me know.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hookway? Okay. Tom, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Mr. Panetta, let me advise you cautiously that this could come back to the Planning Commission, so comments you make
So
here.
I'm going to start out very high.
All I can do is advise.
I'm not making any comments about the pros or cons. I'm just strictly here. Drew McKay couldn't be here tonight. And to help you to understand what the discussions were, and Mr. Fuquay was not at the meeting, with respect to the denial of this. The concern was, the denial was not for all three streets. The concern was Red Birch West, the 540-foot street one, which has 24 units on it, and the other two have cul-de-sacs, which are different dead-end streets than a street that ends in a dead end with a wide backup into it. And the concern was that we didn't know when or if that would ever become a through street, because there's no plans in front of us, and we know of no development down the line. And the fact that it's 540 feet long, and it's a wide turnaround with 24 units on it. And the suggestion that was discussed at Planning Commission was that if that had a cul-de-sac at the end of it, there would have been much less concern. I don't know how the vote would have turned out, but that was the main discussion at Planning Commission. That's not my representation of my views, that's strictly of what Planning Commission said. So with that, I'm going to
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Then I just want a little clarification. on the recommendation that we received. The recommendation we received says, "The Lewes Planning Commission recommends to Mayor and Council to deny the request for a waiver to permit dead-end streets, plural, greater than 200 feet is currently required, blah, 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 blah." Do I understand you to say that the Planning Commission was all right with the 497-foot street that ends in a cul-de-sac and the 210-foot street that ends in a cul-de-sac? It was just the 540-foot street that ends in a Y turnaround that was
Yes,
recommended for denial?
yes.
Okay, so the other two, you recommend approval of the waiver?
We didn't vote on them separately, so I have to be careful about stating that as a fact. But the discussion was strictly about the 540-foot one and the fact that it did not have a cul-de-sac with it.
Well, I'm a little unclear, that I'm not quite sure what we got from the planning commission. I mean, what I read here, I agree with you, and I listened to the tape, that the conversation was not exclusively, it was largely around this longest one with the Y turnaround. But what I see here is, the way this is written is, it looks like it's a recommendation to deny the waiver on all three streets.
Well, I don't believe we felt we had the option to deny one and approve two, because it was a combined request.
Why you couldn't have made a recommendation to that effect.
Well,
I'm wondering if we should send this back to the planning
I think maybe
commission
we
for
should.
some clarity.
But my concern is not the wide turnaround just as acceptable to the code, to the kind of national
I'm going to sit down
standards,
because I don't.
as opposed to having a cul-de-sac. I don't know why we're landing on the fact that it's not a cul-de-sac. I think that's what troubled me. We're trying to put new things into this. If a wide turnaround is acceptable as a means for getting turned around at a dead-end street, why are we saying that it's not acceptable?
I think it's in the code, Fred. I'm looking at the 170-27. It says cul-de-sacs must be incorporated in the design of all permanent dead-end streets.
It is permitted by code. I think that going.
But wait, what, cul-de-sacs or Y
A T
turnaround?
turnaround is permitted by code on a dead-end street.
Y turnarounds are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it's, by code, it's recommending a cul-de-sac, but there's a statement if it's not possible or not feasible, that a T turnaround, which is accepted by the state and the fire marshal. I think that this is not what the planning commission voted on. My recollection of the discussions, I think one of the commissioners voted on it and said that if that road, and it was based on, they didn't know when the development would be done in the future, if that road could have a temporary cul-de-sac on it, they would be in favor of it, but they didn't, as council's saying, the recommendation to council is to deny it, not to deny it or approve it based on a condition.
Right. It's also to deny all of it, the way it's written.
Yes.
Yeah, could I just update my comments? Again, as I said, I was not at that meeting, so I'm just kind of a bit surprised here, because all I knew was what I had found in the city file about the recommendation, and the recommendation says it was a recommendation to deny everything. So that's why I was kind of just very surprised, because it seemed totally contrary to the purpose of the district.
Okay.
If I understand it, and before we start talking about sending it back, the whole reason that the whole annexation districts were created was because the annexation rezoning process was burdensome and time-consuming. So let's not get back into creating more time. I think the issues before you, it sounds like the two streets, the 210-foot street and the street closest to New Road with the cul-de-sacs really aren't an issue then, if I understand.
What's the developer's view on putting a cul-de-sac on the end of this 500? I mean, it's 2.5 times longer than the dead-end street we allow under our code. What's wrong with putting a cul-de-sac in there?
Well, it doesn't fit. I mean, that's what's wrong with it.
No, it fits. It fits. You just might have to give up a unit or two.
Yeah, and that's a pretty expensive proposition. And,
Well, we got a code to uphold here, sir.
well, then, and I'll submit this for the record, there's a cul-de-sac with a T on it across the creek from us. What's the justification for that?
It's in the county, I think you said.
No, this is,
Pilot Town.
that's Pilot Town Village,
Which has
or Pilot Town Reserve.
4 or 5 units on it, I think you said.
Well, but I don't see why that's relevant to it. It's the.
Well, I
No,
do.
This fire marshal, the county and the state all say the T turnarounds are okay for, statewide for fire
So
equipment.
I just want to be clear, so the developer will not consider putting a cul-de-sac on the end of the 540-foot road? Just yes or no?
As I understand, well, Ron, do you have a?
I have a possible
Hey, Ron.
solution.
If we can find a possible solution, it's
Please
fine.
I'm all
identify.
for a possible
Please
solution.
identify yourself, Ron.
Yes, Ron Sutton with Civil Engineering Associates. So the biggest problem with putting the cul-de-sac on the end is that we have this 30-foot buffer that separates the ag land. If we can push that cul-de-sac into that,
Can I just comment on that? Because I looked at that too, of placing a cul-de-sac. The code says that the 30-foot agricultural buffer is required adjacent between a lot and the property line.
Okay.
So when you go below the end of the street,
There's no lot.
there's no lot. So you could stop the agricultural buffer at the lot, which would leave room to possibly put a cul-de-sac in.
that gives me 30 feet. And I
So a
was
cul-de-sac would
close.
fit?
So it's possible I can fit a cul-de-sac in there
Okay.
if that makes,
Well, the reason it's important is, if I understand what happened at the planning commission, that the planning commission didn't like the fact that this blows through the limit in the code, but from the sounds of it, it balanced that concern with the cul-de-sac. And so if that was true for overly long Road 1 and overly long Road 2, then I'm assuming it might be acceptable from the planning commission standpoint for overly long Road 3. So, what do you say?
Here comes
I think,
the ball.
I think Mr. Setting's coming to the podium here.
We don't need this 30 feet, and we think
I'm okay?
I assume so.
We can do a cul-de-sac. And again, just so you understand, we weren't trying to be pig-headed, but we were required to have a 30-foot buffer there.
Sure, no,
Okay,
that's
and-
why we have these discussions, is try to
And
come up
that's why
with
we look at
creative
that.
solutions. Thank you to Mr. Sutton.
I was confused by the 30.
Thank you,
buffer.
Mr.
Looked
Senator.
at it a couple days ago and verified that you don't need to go below, it only needs to be at the lot, so I think you may have room for it.
In closing, we are requesting a waiver as presented in my letter.
Okay, thank
And with the condition that there'd have to be a cul-de-sac
you. Created,
at the,
end of the 540-foot road.
right, the long road.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay,
I would move that we accept the site plan as presented, with the exception that there would be a cul-de-sac placed at the end of the 500 and whatever,
540-foot road. That's River
Is
Birch,
River-
River Birch Drive West.
So we would approve your waiver with the stipulation that there be a turnaround.
Cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac at the end of that road.
Okay.
Do I- We need a second.
Yeah, we will need a second.
This may surprise everybody in the room, but I'll second that.
Mayor, since this is a waiver from a land use requirement, would you do
I
a
think we
roll
need,
call,
yeah, a
please?
voice vote, a call vote,
Well,
okay.
discussion, Mayor.
Please.
I think we're acting in a very ad hoc way. We have an ordinance, we have a lot of factors that have gone into it, some of which have been addressed by Tom, some have been put up at the table, some by the Planning Commission. And to just, without inquiring even into what the Planning Commission's thinking was, we're going to say, okay, one off.
We
I
heard
think
what
it's-
the planning commission, from Tom Panetta,
We
we
don't
heard
have-
what the planning commission was thinking.
I do think that,
Seems to me that-
We hear that they focused on the 540-foot cul-de-sac.
And we are putting a cul-de-sac in.
Yes, I mean, we're not thinking about
I saw it earlier.
the length,
Charlie
the
will get to you.
width, the number of houses, the location, all of those other things that should go into and a revision of an ordinance.
Well-
And that we're not giving that any thought.
Why are we mixing up? We can have a review and revision of the ordinance, but why are we going to hold up this request while we take several months to do a revision? We're mixing apples and oranges, I think.
It's a non-compliant request.
Well, so was Mariners Retreat, and so are a number of other roads and so.
We don't know that.
Okay.
Well, I know Mariners Retreat is certainly,
We
Breaks the
discussed
rule.
that. Anyway, Fred, I think we're done.
Doug, you wanted to say something?
Doug Spellman, Samantha Drive, Canary Creek. Canary Creek was brought up several times this evening. And I'll have you flash back to a May evening 2 years ago, or two plus years ago, where we had a fire. Lewes doesn't have a lot of experience with townhomes, high-density homes. And we had a fire, a serious fire. And we had 3 hook and ladders. I think the total was 15 pieces of firefighting equipment, and not a soul had to turn around because of our streets, our wide cul-de-sacs. So one question would be, is this how big is a cul-de-sac? Is it a standard cookie cutter size? I don't know that. But anyhow, I was at those planning commission meetings, and fire was a concern. Emergency vehicles were a big part of it. And if you don't have a cul-de-sac, and I know we've got a concession, and that's great, I think, but, man, we would have lost buildings.
Yeah, got it.
So it's a big thing. But
Thank you.
But thank you very
Doug,
much.
this plan has been approved by the fire marshal.
That's all well and good.
Yeah, I
But
understand what you're
You
saying.
may lose some lives
Right.
and still comply.
that's a supposition.
Okay.
It is a supposition.
Okay. Charlie, did you want to have a comment?
So I just want to make it clear that one thing that we need to figure out or discuss further is that the intention of the connection street to a possible development next door to the adjacent parcel, the idea of that still needs to be considered because it would affect the section of the streets for River Birch and the other streets leading out of the development, with more stone underneath if we consider greater number of cars coming from some future development. So the idea of it, we can certainly talk about. I don't think that would prohibit putting in a cul-de-sac at this time, but we would probably have to, if we wanted to, we'll have to talk about it, we'd have to, the developer put in a thicker section of road for that future load.
And I think our code talks about that, doesn't it? If
And we
there's a future
commented
connection.
on it in
Yeah.
our letter too, of the construction plans that went out last week.
Correct.
Yep.
I think there are several things like that would have to be considered.
Yeah, I was trying to think, I think there was 1 or 2 other items related to whether it was connected or not that would affect it.
As I recall, the back of Pilottown Village, Seagull Drive, had a turnaround at the end of it.
Did have a cul-de-sac.
And it was extended into Mariners Retreat when it was
Yeah,
done.
that's exactly
And that
what
was
happened.
30 years later.
That's exactly what happened, yes.
Okay. So I think that, there's basis for having done this in the past, so.
Yeah, I'm looking at this isn't to scale, but I'm looking at where the cul-de-sac on the really, really long road would go, and from the looks of it, the cul-de-sac would be a comparable size to the other 2 cul-de-sacs. Okay, just for the record, the developer and the developer's engineer are nodding assent, so I'm going to assume that that's part of the condition. It probably is, I just want to
It is
make
by
sure.
code.
It was a good question.
The city code has a 38-foot
Diameter.
radius
Yeah.
requirement, so.
Excellent.
When Tom looked at it, I think he had the 38-foot in there,
Good,
so.
good.
Okay, great.
Just want to make sure that was all going to be according to
And
code.
the other thing that has come out, and Rob raises an interesting point, is that we ought to ask the planning commission to take a look at this 200-foot and come back with, is there a basis for it, number of houses on it, that would cause it to come down to 200 feet. I think there's a need to get further clarification as to why this 200-foot was put in versus, as it's so different from what exists in the county and elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that we should take a look at is the degree to which, the code commits the city to smart streets, complete streets, and I'm just wondering whether we should build into this AX zones something about interconnectivity where possible. There may be situations where it's not, if other factors, go in the other direction, but long dead-end streets are by and large really not a good idea.
This
So,
is what we're off the point right now.
Okay.
I know we are.
I understand.
I'm just talking about what we
You ready
refer, what we
We're-
refer
we're
back to the planning
To the
commission.
planning commission to
We've got a
consider.
motion.
We have a motion.
We have a motion, we have a second. I'm with
okay.
you.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
have that discussion afterwards.
Right. So we have a motion and a second, and we're doing it as a roll call, as an individual vote. Do you want to
I'll
vote?
start it off if you
will
like.
start off here? Okay.
Yes. I'm going to vote in favor of it. The waiver is permitted by code. It follows the purpose of the cluster. We're going to get 50% open space there. We've already set a precedent in the city. We have other streets, recently, Texas Avenue, Mariners Retreat, that are not over 200 feet. And as Tom said, the Planning Commission was okay with the other streets in here, and with the addition of the cul-de-sac, I think that this is appropriate to grant the waiver.
I will vote in favor of granting the waiver. I disagree with my colleague in that I don't think the streets that were mentioned either by counsel for the applicant or in staff memo really help us much. Some of these are, we don't know what the applicable standard was when these streets were put in. Some of these streets have been around for a very, very long time. Rodney Avenue, School Lane, I mean, DuPont Avenue. I mean, these are streets that were probably laid out long before there were any zoning codes in Lewes. So I don't find the presence of other longer dead-end streets in the city precedential at all. I do think the Planning Commission should take a look at this. I'm also voting in favor of this with the condition that there be a code-compliant turnaround on the
Red Birch or whatever that.
River Birch Drive West. And I'm also basing my vote on my understanding of the concerns of the Planning Commission as clarified this evening. So I think we are in fact voting consistently with what the Planning Commission, with one of the principal concerns of the Planning Commission.
I'm voting in favor of the motion. I agree with my colleague, Dennis. The fact that the fire marshal has approved it, the fact that the county and the state have dead-end street links that are more in keeping with what has gone on in the city over the past years. We don't know when this 200 feet requirement was put in place, and we don't know why it was put in place. And also, I think it's important to note that the developer has worked to adhere to all of the ordinance for the development of the AX-RES zone, and the fact that it has 50% open space, and it has met that by the construction being outside the floodplain. So for all those reasons, in agreement with the Councilman Ridden, I vote in favor of the motion.
I rely on the legal standard for granting a waiver, which is extraordinary hardship to the applicant, and I don't think extraordinary hardship is shown by having to redesign to lose one unit out of 89. It meets that test. And the other standard would result in inhibiting the achievement of the objectives of these provisions. And the AX-RES zone has a very specific purpose clause, 4 purposes, and without reading them into the record, this is section 197-43.1B. There are 4 purposes listed, and none of these would be inhibited. So it's simply obvious to me that this does not meet the waiver standard. And to grant one, regardless of the waiver standard, seems to me to be a departure from good practice.
Thank you. I will vote yes in favor of the waiver based on most of the reasons that have been already stated. I do have concerns. I did have concerns about the wide turnaround. I think the cul-de-sac is a big improvement. I still have concerns about all these dead-end streets, but in general. But I understand from the standpoint of preserving wetlands and open space, there are some limits, so I will vote yes. Thank you. Okay, so we can move on then to, thank you all for the discussion. Moving on to I4, the presentation and possible action on an ordinance to amend the noise regulations as they relate to landscaping equipment, hours of operation. It was an idea or a suggestion that was put forth by Councilperson Morgan, and something that we have not developed a regulation on. I think that there is considerable amount of noise generated from leaf blowers and other pieces of landscaping equipment that sometimes can be very annoying and very disturbing. However, I think we need to do some research here on what the decibels are and that kind of stuff. Rob, maybe you could offer some further information about what your thoughts were when you asked that this be put on the agenda.
There's a state statute on noise which governs, but it's not very clear. We have our own noise ordinance.
Correct.
So the idea here would be not to amend the standard of the state or of the city, but to make specific that in our judgment, certain equipment at certain hours is a violation of those standards. And so I think it's a great idea to ask that we draft something that we might consider to flesh out the noise standard we've got.
Is that something we would send to the planning commission?
I don't think so.
They've
It's
got a lot.
outside their
It's not
jurisdiction.
I think it's us.
It's ours? Okay.
It's us.
They've got a lot. I'd be glad to throw something your way, Glenn. Great.
I think while this item is relating to landscaping equipment, I think we have some issues with construction activity that need to be clarified too, in terms of what's noise on weekends and things like that. So I think it probably needs to be a little broader than just landscaping equipment, okay?
And it also concerns me that this may open up a can of worms, and that if we think leaf blowers are noisy, then the next thing is going to be lawnmowers. We can't allow gasoline engine lawnmowers, and then it'll be these large, long tractors. We can't have those. I think we have to be careful when we start trying to put constraints, and I think it's absolutely essential that we have to hear from the landscaping companies.
Absolutely.
Because if we're not careful, we're going to be putting some people out of business, and do we really want that? And so I'm just saying, I'm not ready to dive into this because I think it's really going to open up a can of worms to any kind of noise, and I don't want to be awakened at 10 o'clock in the morning because I like to sleep late, so some people do. I get up at 6 in the morning, but that's beside the point.
I think you raise a valid point. I think input from landscaping companies, we have several large landscaping
Very
companies in the
large.
area who could probably provide information about the type of equipment they're buying and using.
Well, I mean, I would think any ordinance like this we'd have a workshop on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so Rob, you'll do some homework on that,
I
and
will.
we'll come bring it back maybe next month.
Well, we have a noise ordinance, so all I do is revise it, right?
Right. Expand it.
Expand it.
Yeah.
So you have a place to start from.
Right.
That's right.
Okay, well, there's no action then, other than we'll put it on next month's agenda. Okay. Item I5 is presentation and possible action on a request from the Traffic Safety Committee to replace the yield sign at Rhoda and East 3rd Street with a stop sign. That's right at the end of this street.
Yeah, the traffic committee looked at this issue. I think that may be one of two yield signs that are in this town, and they're both at the either end of 3rd Street, East 3rd Street here. There has been concern expressed by the resident at the corner of 3rd and Roadland that there have been
Red Line
times when her
Avenue.
car was nearly hit.
Brenda
And
Jones.
So we,
It was hit.
we recommended that it could be changed from a yield sign to a stop sign, and I don't think there's any harm done by doing that.
No, and the chief said he didn't have any problem with it, and apparently it was a stop sign at one time and got changed to a yield sign, so we're just putting it back to the stop sign.
I think it was a stop sign very briefly. It was a yield sign for a long time, and
Yeah.
then became a stop briefly.
It was a stop sign during the detour.
Right.
Associated with the Gills Neck Road project.
But before that was a stop sign, before it became a yield sign.
Well, we have a long-term
That's what Brenda
resident
told us.
a third of this street sitting in the audience. Chip, would you like to comment on when was it a stop sign and when was it a yield sign?
I don't know the time frame, but they're both.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Now, this will require a code amendment. If you all approve it, we can go ahead and make the sign change and then bring back the code amendment next.
Okay,
month.
great.
I think that traffic patterns may be changing, particularly with people when they're coming down Gills Neck from all the subdivisions.
Developments.
All developments out there, and they're looking for a shortcut, so, I mean, I think it's important for safety.
Oh, I think we're all guilty of making a rather sloppy turn there as we leave City Hall. So, do we have a motion to approve this?
So moved,
Second.
coming from a committee.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Fred, seconded by Dennis. Moving on then to I-6 is presentation of possible action on a letter to Sussex County regarding the proposed rezoning of Mitchell Farm. We've been watching and observing the plans that have been submitted to the county for Mitchell Farm, and obviously we have the one medical building that's already been built out there. I think we've seen the proposed development for the additional buildings and the additional townhouses and freestanding homes that are being proposed for the internal lot. Obviously, there's been concern expressed about traffic and what that development might mean in terms of further difficulties or further complications with traffic on Gills Neck and Kings Highway. So I think we're talking about the idea of working on a letter. Anne Marie, would you like to comment further? I know you've been done some work on this.
Yes, so Tom and I have actually worked on a letter that we circulated to the five of you. I did get some minor edits from Councilperson Morgan. I guess I would ask if you've had an opportunity to take a look at it, and with some minor tweaks, would you be comfortable sending it to the county? This is supposed to be heard by the County Planning and Zoning Commission on March 12th.
Have you confirmed that date?
I thought it was February 27th.
It was, but now
Okay,
it's
they
March
moved it?
12th.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Is that not right?
It might be.
I think members of the Mitchell family are sitting directly behind you. Is that correct date, March 12th? March 12th. Thank you. Thanks for the confirmation.
As of today.
As of today. Subject to further clarification
Exactly.
or
Caveat there,
adjustment.
huh?
Okay. But we'll use the March 12th date for this purpose, okay?
I was out of town today, so I didn't see this
Okay.
until I got back, so I
That's
may
fine.
have some comments. I've skimmed it, and it looks great.
Okay.
But I reserve the right to look more closely.
Well, I think all of us, we just got it this afternoon, so I think all of us need time to look at it.
Right.
But I think the idea of preparing a letter is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time, so.
Yeah, I would make a motion to approve the letter with minor tweaks for input from council over the next 4 or 5 days.
Okay?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to, yes, Mary?
Alice, Mary. I'm going to ask this on behalf of the Byway Committee, that when the letter's done, would you mind sharing it with us? Because we also are currently working on a communication, and we'd like to make sure that they're speaking from the same page.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. All right. And moving on to I-7, is presentation of possible action on request of an extension of a 99-year lease on property located at 1802 Cedar Avenue, Sussex County Tax Map 335-4.14-086-00. This is a standard lease extension, I presume, Glenn, is that correct?
By right lease extension, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure about the encroachments. I looked at the photographs, but couldn't tell. No,
No
no.
encroachments.
There are no, I went by there on my way over here, and the house sits on the canal side of Cedar facing the Children's Beach House, and there's no encroachment in front of the house that would prevent parking.
Do we have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Good. Moving on then to item 8I8, a presentation of possible action on one-year renewal of a conditional use agreement on the placement of a 14 by 64-foot Redmond trailer on the property located at 406 Park Avenue on behalf of the estate of Isabel Jackson, commencing on February 13th, 2020 through March 14th, 2021. This has come forward to us basically every year. We've never had any problems with this. Mrs. Jackson is deceased, and there are family members who continue to reside in this unit.
Move approval.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to item I9 is presentation and possible action on a request to participate in the 2020 DENREC Mosquito Abatement Program. We have participated in this program on an annual basis for many, many years. I think that one thing, it's a great program that helps us control the mosquitoes and things like that, other flying critters too. I think the important thing here is prior notification of our residents when this is going to happen.
Well, we don't always.
The DENREC does that.
We don't always know, and residents can actually sign up for notifications through DENREC's website.
Okay. Nick, could you make sure you put that in the paper? Okay. And we'll put it out on, if we approve it here tonight, we'll put it out on our website.
Okay.
That anyone who's interested in knowing the more definitive dates of when the actual spraying is going to be done, that they should contact DENREC. We have a motion to approve this.
Move.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. That concludes the open portion of our meeting. We have a motion to go into executive session if there are items to continue to discuss.
Did you want to talk to Glenn about?
Oh, about what we talked
Yeah,
about,
just
yeah.
So we'll
okay.
be
Very brief.
A brief executive session, so motion to go under pursuant to 21 Delaware Code 10004B. The executive session shall